Hi, everyone. Today on the Writing Gym podcast, we're talking all about the importance of an agent. You're going to walk away with insider tips from a renowned literary agent on when you need an agent, what they look for in submissions, why you need an agent, how to handle a rejection professionally, and the inside scoop on an agent's life.
Welcome to the Writing Gym podcast. We're here to pump up your writing. And now your host, Andy Brixey, personal trainer at the Writing Gym.
Hi, I'm Andy, personal trainer at the Writing Gym. Welcome to Endurance Training with Ruben. Today, we are going to be getting top expert tips from a renowned literary agent. I'm excited to introduce you to this week's guest, but first, I'd like to reintroduce our resident writing coach, the gal who helps you pump your writing into shape in the Writing Gym. Welcome back to the Writing Gym podcast, Annalisa Parent.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Listen, everyone, I really don't want to spill the beans, but even if Annalisa is an amazing writing coach, and I would know as she is my writing coach, she's full of surprises. Not only can she write and speak fluent English, but she can do the exact same thing in French.
Mais oui, it's true.
Check out everything in the show notes, and there will be, I'm sure, some sort of fun and exciting proof of this lovely French-speaking lady. And now to introduce you all to our lovely guest, Ruben. Eric is the founder and president of Ruben Agency located in New York City. As a veteran entertainment professional and a graduate of New York's Cardozo School of Law, Eric has a huge, unique perspective that is available to writers. Working in partnership, he assists clients in determining how best to achieve their personal and professional goals. He's a literary agent with a proven track record of sales to major publishers. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today, Eric.
Je suis heureux de faire vos connaissances. Okay, that was it. I shot my wad. No, hi, it's really a pleasure to be with you guys. My wife actually speaks French fluently. I fake it.
Oh, well, that
I'll
was
be
very
in
good.
Geneva next month, and I will speak English, so I don't embarrass myself. Anyway, thank you for having me.
Of course, we're so excited to have you here. So the first question that we really want to get out there is, what inspired you to become a literary agent?
Well, it's very interesting. It absolutely was not a goal of mine. I went to law school, and I also was an actor and a writer. But my best friend from high school is a woman named Suzanne Brockman, and many of you may know that she's a New York Times bestselling author. But she wasn't always. And ever since high school, she was writing. During the time when I'd already been an attorney, she had sold several books to Harlequin for the Silhouette line and for Bantam Love Swept, and was looking to find a way to create a hook for a miniseries. There were a lot of different things that had already been done, and we realized that, and her husband and I had assisted her in really getting her career to move to the next level. We knew a series was the way to do that. And ultimately, we were looking for ideas for a series that hadn't been done before. Everybody does the town, people move in, people move out. You have maybe a series of 5 brothers, 1 illegitimate brother, things like that. So I had picked up a Newsweek while at the dentist. It was an old Newsweek, and it had a whole article on Navy SEAL training. And I called Suze and said, oh my God, these guys are heroes. They work in teams. You can just do this. And I sent her to her library because this was just around the time AOL was happening. So we didn't have the easy access to things online that we do now. And the rest is history. She became a New York Times bestselling author with 2 separate SEALs stories. That's Brooklyn behind me making noise. I don't know if you hear it, but Brooklyn is full of all sorts of interesting noises. Sirens at the moment. In any event, when that took off, when Suze's career took off, I ended up traveling across the country with her numerous times on many book tours, and literally in the back of a minivan. Many stories I won't tell in this podcast, but they are funny. In any event, literally every Walden Books, sadly, we don't have them anymore, but I've been to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, Mattoon, Illinois, you name the town, I've been there. If they had a Borders, a Barnes & Noble, or Walden Books. In any event, went to many RWAs and Romantic Times conventions, met lots of people, and didn't realize I was becoming fluent in publishing and already had my law degree and a business sense. And I started getting approached by authors who wanted me to represent them. My first thought was, I don't know anything about this. And then somebody convinced me to do it. And I discovered that I had a lot to learn, but I had some basic instincts. And one thing led to another. And yeah, my first client was actually Annalisa, who is still a client and has written several Navy SEAL romances for source books. So that is a long intro on how I got involved. In fact, I met Sue Grimshaw when she was the romance buyer for Borders Books, long before she was an acquiring editor at Bantam Lovespot.
Wow, I love that story, Eric. I mean, it's funny when you're on the outside of something, you think that there's kind of this straight line to get there, but in real life, it's this meandering path and how we become what we are. And I think that that's inspiring for the writers who are listening to this podcast. It's not always going to be as direct as maybe you think it's going to be. And so that's really inspiring, your life story there.
Oh, thanks. Well, that's a little bit of my life story, but yes. I should also say that anything that I've ever planned methodically and made a real set of goals and made plans for is not what's brought me tremendous satisfaction or excitement. Best things in my life were not planned and came out of intuitive leaps.
Life is what happens while we're busy making other plans, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And the good life, maybe. So you mentioned a lot of romance in that portion of your biography. Is that something that you still rep, or what kinds of things are you looking for?
Well, yes, I absolutely represent romance. And all kinds of romance. I'm not particularly interested in inspirational, just because I'm not sure I get it. It's not really who I am. And the notion of Amish romance amuses me more than intrigues me, but I know it's very big, and I've had several lunches recently with editors where they keep talking about it. But I'd be lying if I said I knew anything about it other than I've lived near the Amish when I lived in Philly. But anyway, I digress. So all types of romance, and I've represented a variety of romance writers from, romantic suspense to, cowboy romance, to small town romance, sweet, hot. I view romance in many ways as the macaroni and cheese of writing. And I say that as someone who loves macaroni and cheese. But basically, when you order macaroni and cheese, you want your macaroni and cheese and you want it the way you want it. If somebody comes to you with this sort of, I deconstructed and used a strange cheese, and instead of using, no, people want something that they want and they know. Now, that doesn't mean it's the same old thing. They want an awesome version of what they know. Mm-hmm. So, in any event, yes, so that's romance. But I've also represented mystery writers, horror writers, sold a series of books to mystery publishers. I have a legal thriller client who is actually an Edgar nominee in the past. And I'm constantly on the lookout for something that I find entertaining or interesting. Here, let me adjust my camera here so you don't look right up my nose. So a wide variety of things. While I wouldn't say I'm actively looking for literary fiction, if somebody's writing really blew me away with a piece of literary fiction, I'd be interested. I've certainly represented some women's fiction and LGBT stories. So basically anything that I would consider genre fiction, anything that is entertaining.
Great.
And there's a list, by the way, I'm sorry, but if you go to my website and my submission guidelines, you will see what I'm absolutely not interested in, like screenplays, comic books, things like that.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, let's back it up a step, Eric, for writers who are listening, writers who aspire to become authors, but they're not really clear on what the role of a literary agent is. So what is it that you do to help these writers to become authors? What's your role in the publishing process?
Well, I'll only speak for myself because various agents have various approaches, and that could be some just make the deal. And I like to think that and some are real full-blown editors, and I don't view that as my job, and I don't view my job as just making the deal. I like to think of myself as being more of management, which means I may give editorial feedback. I'm not going to do a line edit for a client. If you need line edits, I'm probably not going to represent you. But if I like your voice and I like the writing in general, but I think that your book is coming in at too high a word count or too low a word count, or there are big gaps or oddities that just don't work, then we'll have editorial conversations. But I feel like if somebody signs with me, what they get is someone who's going to give them honest feedback about their work and also look at what their career trajectory should be and where we should be submitting to, what they should be writing or what they're interested in writing. I never tell somebody not to write something. I will tell them that I don't think it's marketable, but if they want to pursue it, go ahead. I wouldn't threaten to no longer represent them, but they just need to be honest that we may not be able to sell it, or if we do, it may not bring them what something else might bring them. I would be honest in saying that maybe it's not their best avenue, it's not their best voice. Someone who really writes great romance suddenly wants to write horror, and it's just not happening for me. And even though they love it, we need to have that kind of conversation. So that's part of what I do. And of course, I also negotiate deals. I mean, I've been an attorney for 30 years. I can explain why the contract is bad or why it's good. And many deals are good even if there's no advance, or even if there's a low advance. There are so many factors in making a deal: the prestige of the publisher, the marketing plan, where somebody's at in their career. I've had people who hadn't sold something in a couple of years, and a deal could get them back in the game. It's very different from somebody who this is their 8th book in a series and their numbers are really great. Everything is, I'm not McDonald's, so my clients aren't hamburgers. I don't just in and out flip the same thing. Everybody is bespoke, which, if you don't know what that means, it's a custom-made suit. So every client is handled differently and individually. Just hope that's helpful.
No, that's really helpful. And I think that you touched on some really important things that beginning writers might not think about around marketability, right? You could have a space odyssey, thriller, alien, vampire romance, and that might be your thing, and you really want to write that, and you do it really well, but that doesn't mean that somebody necessarily might want to buy it. So I love that you made that distinction for writers, that we absolutely should follow our dreams and follow our passion and inspiration and imagination. And there might be a difference between what we're putting out into the world and what actually wants to be traditionally published. So thank you for bringing up that great point. So tell us a little bit more about when somebody's ready to look for an agent. When should they be reaching out to someone like you?
Okay, well, nobody should be looking for an agent if their manuscript isn't ready. If their manuscript isn't fully done, don't talk to an agent. No agent wants to talk about the possibility of something. They want the product. Also, your manuscript should be ready for a professional to look at it. The best way I can think of this is if you've ever watched a show like American Idol. If you go on American Idol and you're not really a singer with no real experience and your friends think you're great at karaoke, chances are you're not a professional. If you're a writer who has had their work reviewed by other professionals or friends who are writers, critique partners, maybe a professional at it, it doesn't have to be, but it certainly shouldn't be your first draft that I'm looking at or any other agent. That's really important. If you are ready to have a professional conversation, if you're not ready to think of your work as product, I like to say that what I do is I turn art into commerce. And if you're not comfortable with that, then you're not comfortable talking to an agent. Because agents, while they absolutely like to have people's art be in the world, we make money doing what we do. And so we need to think about financial implications and commercial implications. It's not a hobby for us. And you may notice sometimes on social media, I talk about this. I will often get submissions from people and I will give them my usual form rejection, which is polite, but to the point. And then I will get an email back saying, can you give me any feedback or any edits? And the answer is no, because I don't have time and I don't get paid to do that. If people were to pay me to do that, I would absolutely do that. But I only get paid when people's work sells. And that's an important thing for people to realize. And that is why agents do not waste time, or what we consider waste time. I know sometimes we can seem curt or brusque, but we have to represent our existing clients and we really have to make the best use of our time because, you know, having an office in New York City and an apartment in Brooklyn does not allow me to just give it away for free, as it were. I know that sounds mercenary, but let's be realistic. Also, this is the pros. This is the NFL, as it were. So you have to be willing to hear straight talk about your work. And if you have trouble listening to a real critique, then you shouldn't be talking to an agent.
Those are all really excellent points on sort of what the agent's role is to take a piece that is fully formed, that is ready to go out into the world. You know, and I feel like as you're saying this, I'm kind of nodding over here because I feel like I'm a possible intermediary in that process because I help people get from, you know, either I've got an idea or I've got an outline or I've got a manuscript that I think might be finished, but I'm not quite sure to, okay, then how do we send this to an agent and get it ready for that? And hopefully, you know, for writing coaches, me and many of the other writing coaches out there, they're helping writers through that process of preparing to hear things that you don't really want to hear about your manuscript and being able to separate yourself from that feedback because the manuscript isn't you. You did create it, but it's not you. And you really need to be at a point where someone can say to you, I want you to change the name of your main character. I want you to take the last chapter and make it the first chapter and not to have any real emotional connection to that. You might be like, I don't like that idea, but I'm going to do it because it's good for the novel.
You know, I auditioned as a professional actor for a long time, and I've auditioned for some big names and people you've never heard of. And when you audition literally hundreds of times in New York City for Broadway shows, and people say, thank you, next, you know, you understand they have something they're looking for and you got to go in, wow them and leave on to the next thing when you don't get it. You have to conduct yourself with a certain level of professionalism and also see yourself as a product. But with the writing, you're not the product, or at least not completely. There is an element of that now because of social media and because of changes in the publishing world. Authors need to be more involved and have their personality be a part of their career. I don't know if that's jumping ahead or too much information. But
no, that's really good information sort of about the back end after you're published, once you're published, how you're going to market yourself and create your author platform. But before we move on to that, Eric, you raised some really interesting points about dealing with rejection. And I think that you know, I think there's a moment for a lot of writers where they make a decision after they've gotten a certain number of rejections, where they just kind of quit. You know, and part of becoming published is the perseverance to collect all of those rejection slips and to improve your craft and to move on. So what kinds of tips can you give to authors? You know, if you could have a phone conversation with the person who you sent that form letter to, you know, and they're in tears, you know, what would be kind of the secret tips that you could whisper in their ear to be like, you know, look, here's how you can move on. Like, here's what to do next. This isn't the end of the world. Here's what you got to do.
Well, first of all, for people who follow me on Twitter at the Eric Ruben, they know that I do 10 queries on a fairly regular basis. And while they may not see their specific piece because I keep it as close to anonymous as possible, they see a lot of the things happen over and over again about word count or prologues that are inappropriate or clunky exposition. So, you know, learning your craft is the number one thing. If you're getting a lot of rejections, I think that's an indication that you need to go back to your fundamentals and really see if you know your craft. Look, everybody thinks they can write. It's just not accurate. Yes, I suppose they can write if they talk about making a list for shopping, but I would say go back to reading great books, watching great shows and films, because they give you the information right there. Something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or The West Wing, which are two of my favorite shows, talk to you about how dialogue moves forward, what's pacing, how to tell the difference between characters and have very different voices, and how to give exposition without being clunky about it. Those are just a couple of examples of that kind of thing. But more nuts and bolts about how to handle rejection emotionally is to make sure that you don't get your self-worth from your craft. You need to have family and relationships and downtime, and you also need to stoke the creative fires, go to a museum, watch a movie, listen to music, do things that have nothing to do with with writing, but are still part of the creative process, because those will fuel you. But you also need to have a passion for writing. And know that if you're writing to make money, there's easier ways to do that. If you're writing because you have to write and you love to write, that's when your passion comes across the page. Let me just say this. We've all been to movies where it's pretty clear the actors needed a paycheck to pay for their kids' school. We know because the project just isn't good, and they are phoning that in. You can read when somebody phones it in. You can read when someone said, don't bother editing this, versus when you're riveted because the writer's riveted. There really are no secrets. Your author tells you how they're feeling. You can read it. And I think that that is important for writers to realize. I know I'm kind of all over the place with my answers, but you invited me, so that's no problem.
No, they're good answers, and it's nice that you're all over the place, because I feel like that's kind of how the writer's brain works. It kind of, you know, bursts of everything all in different directions. I love that you made the point about learning your craft, going back and learning new things, and I think that that's such important advice no matter what kind of author you are. And that's something that we do on the website at writing-gym.com, where we give authors these modules, these videos, these worksheets, these chances to explore their writing and work harder and go back to the basics and work on their craft. Because even if you've been writing for 50 years, sometimes it's important to go back and go, why did I start doing this in the first place? Like, what is happening with my life? And I think that it's so easy for authors to get frustrated, you know, when you can't get that exposition right, when your characters aren't developing really well and people get writer's block and don't know where to go. And it's really exciting that that's part of something that we're doing, that they can go back to the basics and learn their craft, like you said. Thank you, Annalisa, for more of your great writing advice. Annalisa is the resident writing coach in the Writing Gym. She helps writers start, finish, and bring to publication writing in all genres. And as she is my own writing coach, I can tell you she is absolutely fantastic. Also, if you love the Writing Gym podcast, we'd love to have you join us in the Writing Gym. Top agent Eric Ruben just gave us a ton of good reasons why getting the right knowledge is important. The right know-how is vital to publishing. You do want to publish, don't you? You don't want to be one of those writers who gets bogged down in the exposition, has sloppy dialogue, and your manuscript gets tossed to the wayside. You want success in publishing. You want the yes, we want your manuscript. How do you get there? The right knowledge about writing craft. How do you get that knowledge? The writing gym. You just heard Eric say, learning your craft is the #1 thing to getting published. Don't be left behind. Get the in at www.writing-gym.com today. And stay tuned for information on the opportunity to work one-on-one with resident writing coach Annalisa Parent and participate in the exclusive writing mastermind as part of the Writing Gym's VIP membership. We only open this membership twice a year, so you don't want to miss it. To see what we're up to this week, go to writing-gym.com. Don't forget the dash. Thank you for joining us to pump up your writing here on the Writing Gym podcast. Check out the show notes to find out any information you might have missed. And don't forget to let us know how this interview helped your writing journey by subscribing to the Writing Gym and leaving us a fantastic 5-star rating. Thank you so much, and happy writing.
This has been the Writing Gym Podcast with Andy Brixey and Annalisa Parent. To join the Writing Gym, visit www.writing-gym.com.